sponsored by the Institute of Museum and Library Services.
Hi, and welcome to the 2021 National Book Festival. I'm Ava Schifferns, and I'm a ninth grader at Campbell County High School in Gillette, Wyoming.
Hi, I'm Bailey Carberry, and I'm a ninth grader at Thunder Basin High School, also in Gillette, Wyoming. Ava and I served as student ambassadors in the fall 2020 Grab the Mic tour with Library of Congress National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, Jason Reynolds.
Today, Bailey and I are interviewing Tahira Mafi on her new book, An Emotion of Great Delight. Thank you so much for being here. Ms. Mafi, can you please tell us a little bit about your book?
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview today. My new book, An Emotion of Great Delight, is a follow-up to my first work of realistic fiction, A Very Large Expanse of Sea. Both books take in the post 9/11 world and follow different characters, both of whom wear a hijab and are visibly Muslim in this post 9/11 era. But they follow very different journeys. An Emotion of Great Delight is about trying to claw your way back to joy when you were trapped in amber of sorrow. So there's not a ton of delight in the book, but it's mostly about the search for joy.
Yeah, it's a really good book. So I was wondering, were there any real life events that inspired you to write An Emotion of Great Delight?
Yeah. Well, I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened. The horrific events of which would go on to change the world. And in a more way, they irrevocably changed mine. I was then as well a very visibly Muslim young woman in high school, and it's not like it was particularly easy being me before 9/11, but afterward, there was a sudden spotlight on me and anybody who looked like me or anybody from my community. And it really changed the way that I moved through the world and the way that the world saw me as I moved through it. And I have written about this experience in different ways, as I mentioned, first with A Very Large Expanse of Sea, and now with An Emotion of Great Delight. A Very Large Expanse of Sea was about unlearning anger. And it was in many ways a lighter, funnier book. This book is much heavier, and it's about sorrow mostly. So I approached both stories from different emotional avenues, and but they were both heavily influenced by my own experiences as a young person and the experiences of the people that I knew from the Muslim communities that I was a part of, and from the friends that I had, the stories that I heard. In An Emotion of Great Delight, the book takes place in 2003, shortly after we've officially declared war on Iraq. And this setting is considerably different from my previous book, because at this point, the political climate has changed pretty significantly. And for me personally, this was a period of time that I lived through when the FBI was raiding mosques and infiltrating our communities with undercover FBI agents. And it was a very strange time. People's houses were just being ransacked for no particular reason, and people were being asked to spy on each other in our communities. And so many people at the mosque had been assigned an FBI agent that it was becoming a running joke. But it was actually a really terrifying time It was really scary. And it was a strange backdrop against which to grow up, especially for somebody like me who recognizes herself as American. I was born here, this is my country. And I was being treated constantly like it was not. So it was kind of a long way of answering that question, but the answer is yes. These books were in many ways defined by my own experiences.
How did you come up with the title of An Emotion of Great Delight?
So the main character of this book, her name is Shadi, and in Farsi, the name Shadi means joy. And the dictionary definition of the word joy is an emotion of great delight. And this book is about Shadi's return to herself. It is about her journey back to joy, back to the beginning, back to the essence of who she really is and who she wants to be.
That's really clever. I like that. So why did you give Shadi the struggles that she has with her family and her best friend?
I think I really, with this book, really wanted to try and capture how difficult it is not just to be, a person of color struggling with a very specific issue, right? We talk about that, and I think that's super important. And it's super important to have stories that are just focused on that. But for me, what I struggled with in high school, in addition to being a marginalized person, in addition to being a visibly different person who didn't quite fit in, and who struggled with all of these like obvious struggles, I was also just a person. I was also just a teenager dealing with regular pain and all of the many traumas and struggles that affect any young person's life. And I never saw stories like that when I was growing up. But while I think sometimes Shadi's struggles in this book might seem to some people unrealistic, actually, I would say to anybody who thinks that Shadi's struggles in this story seem unrealistic, I would say, I'm really happy that you think that, because that means that you didn't have those experiences growing up. And that much pain seems like way too much for one person. And that it would feel that way says to me that, that you didn't have those experiences. And I think that's the way it should be for most people. But it wasn't that way for me. And it wasn't that way for a lot of people that I knew. We were at a very young age expected to shoulder many, many different burdens, many different emotional burdens. And it felt in many ways, at many times, just absolutely devastating. And I wanted to try and capture that on the page. I wanted to tell that story for the teenager that I was, and for the teenagers that I knew, and the teenagers I know now, and say, I see you, if you're out there and there's just, the world feels like it just won't stop clobbering you. I get it. And I see that.
What inspired you to start writing books?
The simple answer, the short answer is that I really wanted to be a part of the world that was responsible for getting young people interested in fiction. For me, books were a huge escape growing up. They were, in the absence of friendships, my only real friends. That sounds a little sad, but it was a huge gift to me. I spent most of my summers in the library and most of my days with books. And if it weren't for that, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be who I am today. And what's interesting, though, is that despite my great love of books and literature and reading, I never once ever thought that I could be a writer. I've always recognized myself as a reader first and a writer second. And that might be because, I don't know, growing up, no one ever made me think or led me to believe that I could ever be a writer. That wasn't the kind of job my parents expected me to get. And I couldn't afford to be a starving artist. So that just never occurred to me as a feasible life goal. But after I graduated from college, I started reading for fun again. And I had forgotten what it was like after years of reading for school and exams and papers and, higher education, taking myself very, very seriously. I'd lost the essence of why I started reading books to begin with, and I wanted to start writing stories that would take me back to the beginning of that, the genesis of my love for books.
I can relate a lot to that on like being more of thinking of yourself as a reader, because I really, really enjoy reading a lot. You can ask anybody in my family and they'll tell you most of the time I have my nose stuck in my book. So on the topic of family, how do your family and friends influence your writing? Or if they do, how?
My writing only becomes obvious to me years later. Years later, I will look back and look at what I've written or a book that I published and think, oh, I was clearly working through something when I was writing that, or I was dealing with this problem that now seems obvious to me that was not so obvious to me then. So I definitely think that it's not just the people, but it's the situations or the experiences that I have with the people around me. I think all of that influences what I write and what I choose to write about. Though I'm also becoming increasingly obvious to myself as the years progress. I'm realizing that I come back to the same themes over and over again. And at first, I didn't love that discovery, but now I'm learning to accept it, that I'm often trying to, work through a lot of the pain that I felt as a young person, I think, or even as an adult. It's always changing. But I seem to be drawn to these themes over and over again. And I think the people in my life certainly influence that. They influence the way that I look at the world. And sometimes I build characters that are loosely inspired by people I know or people I've known. So there's definitely inspiration in all of that.
I imagine the process of writing books takes a long time and has many steps. Does that process of writing change how you see the world?
Does it change how I see the world? That's such an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that before. If the process of writing a book changes how I see the world, I think yes, absolutely. I think one of the strangest things about my job is that I am expected in many ways in this new digital age to be present on the internet. And also just as a part of my job, I'm expected to speak, to do things like this. In a different world, I would be doing them in person, making public appearances. And I've always found that part of my job very strange because it's a very self-selecting group of people who choose to be writers. We're the kinds of people who like to be quiet, and we spend a lot of time alone. And so does writing a book change the way that I see the world? I think so, because I see the world quietly. I think I move through the world more as an observer. Not that I don't engage with it. I engage with it a great deal, but I think my mind operates as a thief, stealing what it can from the world around me, from the experiences around me, from the things that I see. in interpersonal exchanges, or just in the art that I consume, or the films I watch. Everything is fair game and everything is an inspiration. And so I look at the world, I think, differently, but also I move through it quietly, I think, more quietly than I might otherwise. It's just, I spend a lot of time being quiet.
So besides being quiet, do you have any interests and hobbies that relate to your writing as well? Like, if let's say you're interested in like drawing, do you ever make a character that's also interested in drawing? And if you do, is there like a cool, interesting fact that you've learned, or like something that you've learned about one of your hobbies that came from writing from them?
Yeah, I definitely, like I have a new book coming out in February, and it's the first in a new fantasy series. And the main character is, among other things, a seamstress. And I have always had an interest in fashion and fashion design. And I used to make my own clothes in high school. And so I was very interested in that sort of thing. And it's always fun for me to tap into those interests when I'm creating new characters. But sometimes, my character will want to be something that I have no interest in, and I'll have to go and learn about it and do research and figure out, all kinds of things. So, most present in my mind right now is my new book, because I was working on it most recently, which is not an emotion of great delight, but I've definitely had to do a ton of research to learn more about all kinds of things. Most recently, I had to do a ton of research on water, ancient water systems. It's just, and you do hours and hours and hours of research just to write a couple of sentences with some conviction. So you don't end up using all of it, but you end up spending a ton of time doing that research. And it's been great. It's a highly edifying process. I certainly learn a lot.
That's very cool. What's your favorite book you've written and why?
Usually it's the book that I have most recently completed. And that's because no one has read it yet. I love my books before other people have read them. When other people read them, then I have their opinions in my head, and it's very easy for me to convince myself that my books are terrible. So sometimes even good feedback confuses me, and I have to just relinquish my book into the world at some point and let it go, and tell myself that it is no longer mine. So that's always a little painful. So I think my favorite book is always the one that I've not yet shared with the world, when it's still close to me and feels kind of private.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Miss Mafi. And thank you to the audience for joining the 2021 National Book Festival.
Thank you, guys. These were lovely questions. Thank you so much for your time.